Greetings, y'all. Justin here. Thank you for tuning in. Just need to highlight a content warning ahead of today's episode, as this episode does contain some sensitive subject matter and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
I have clients who, when they finally realize that they've made such a mess of their lives and they damaged their partner so deeply, they feel remorse. They feel all kinds of remorse. And I tell them remorse is not enough. I mean, of course, remorse is appropriate. Remorse is when you feel bad about yourself. I lean into empathy.
Welcome to Living Once Twice, a lifestyle design and personal adventure podcast. My name is Justin. Come with me as I'm here to help you chart your course for creating the fulfilling life you desire. Join me as every Wednesday we'll dive into the inspiring guest stories, remarkable science, and useful strategies to help you create the momentum you need to take action towards designing your dream life. Remember, your dream life is waiting for you. It's time to go for it. You deserve it. Greetings all. Welcome back to Living Once Twice, the place where we rewrite narratives, reinvent ourselves, and reimagine our lives. Thank you all for tuning into today's episode. Before we dive in, please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and also the YouTube channel, and give us a follow on Instagram at Living Once Twice, where you can view more great content, including information on all of our amazing guests this season, including the guest that I'm going to bring on today, which is Bill Herring. Bill is a certified sex addiction therapist and counselor based out of Atlanta. As a leader and expert in this area, Bill's mission is to help people make sense of their destructive sexual behavior, including chronic infidelity, porn struggles, and sex addiction, and also develop the tools and skills to improve their lives and heal their relationships. Bill is also the creator of the problematic sexual behavior theory or framework, which we will talk about a little bit later on. Additionally, Bill is also a certified clinical partner specialist that's deeply committed to helping partners of chronic sexual betrayal heal their lives from the pain of complex betrayal trauma. Bill, welcome to the show. I know that was a mouthful there, but I wanted to make sure we represented you well. But how are you doing today?
No, I appreciate that, Justin. Thank you so much for the lead in. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to have you, Bill. And before we dive into your story and the great insight that you've got to share with our audience, I just wanted to, again, echo all the appreciation that I shared with you before we hit record for the work that you do, the framework that you provide, especially because this has been helpful in my own journey as I've wallowed in these behaviors, whether it's lust, whether it's porn. And it's something that as I've been working to get honest on and really address this dark area of my life, I have found your work and the work of just others really helpful in healing that. And so I'm very appreciative, not just your time, but then also the work you do too regarding the partners who are impacted by this type of trauma, by this type of betrayal, because I know you offer a lot of support there to the many different painful consequences that come as a result of this. So I just really want to thank you again.
I appreciate that.
So Bill, there's a lot of areas that I want to dive into. Everything from is like sex addiction real to your framework, problematic sexual behavior, and what getting help in this area looks like. But where I want to start with you is telling us more about your journey, Bill, and specifically, how did you find yourself becoming a sex addiction therapist and counselor and wanting to support people in this way?
Sure. Thanks. Great question. There's a philosopher whose name I can't remember, who says something to the extent that life is lived moving forward, but it's understood looking backward. We don't really know how our story is unfolding until we can have enough perspective to look back and see where we've been and how it all unfolds. So my professional journey goes hand in hand with my personal journey. That I'm in my 60s, and years back, decades ago, when I was realizing that I was having some issues myself with how I was living my life, both in terms of my sexual choices as well as just overall choices, that I needed to go get help myself and sought therapy, and had some wonderful people in my life who have really been able to help me in that regard, and then even found myself in different 12-step programs, which I heartily support. I think they've been very, very valuable. So at the same time that I was getting my own help, I realized that there was a need for since I was a therapist at that time, that I sort of followed my own path and began to take more coursework and then get more training and finally get certification, both as an addictions therapist and then more specifically as a sex addiction therapist. That brought me on to, led me to an organization called the National Council on Sexual Addiction and Compulsivity back at the turn of the century, which is an organization that was really trying to help increase public awareness about the sexual addiction and all of the other different terms that it went by, which is where that phrase sexual compulsivity came in. I'm going to go in and speak just a minute past that. So I joined the board of directors of that group right at a time when there was just still, you asked the question about is sex addiction real? Short answer, yes. But especially 20 some odd years ago, there was still much more controversy about it. And really a desire to sort of come out of the shadows and let people know this is a real deal and we need to be able to talk about it. So at the same time, there were other branches of therapists. I'll just say a lot of sex therapists didn't agree that sex addiction was a real thing. And I'd come back and talk about why. I can understand why they felt a little leery about it. So different sort of camps started putting out different language, like, well, sexual compulsivity or maybe sexual obsession, or some people who would just say, there's no problem with it at all. So this organization that was involved in flipped our title from looking at the problem to looking at the solution. So the National Council on Sexual Addiction and then the National Council on Sexual Addiction and Compulsivity, we decided that we're going to keep adding words to that, like maybe hypersexuality or so forth, or let's just stop focusing on the problem and start focusing on the solution. So this organization became the Society for the Advancement of Sexual Health. And this was a huge turnaround, both professionally as well as personally for me, because it caused me to start looking at, okay, whatever we want to call all of these issues, where are we trying to head? What is the ultimate goal? And the ultimate goal is to live in a healthy way. And that includes living in a sexually healthy way. So that really turned my focus for the last 20 some odd years of looking at helping the profession, helping the industry, and really helping professionals and public get a handle on what does it mean to be living in a way that you could say is sexually healthy. And that's a long answer to your short question, and there's a lot that can build from that. So I think I'll stop, take a breath, and take it back, put it back over to you.
Yeah. No, Bill, I appreciate you just walking us through the journey, both personally and professionally, and how some of your own personal experiences have also aided your purpose in working and helping folks in this area. But thank you too for kind of helping us understand the journey and the evolution of this. Because yes, one of the questions is like, is addiction real, or what's kind of been the journey? Because we know it's been such a taboo topic. And if you don't mind just kind of taking us back a little bit more about some of that debate, like, is it because of the misunderstanding about it, the education? Because even myself, when I think about my own, when I learned of the term, it was always with celebrities. And it was almost kind of like, is this an excuse for their bad behavior?
Absolutely.
But if you could share more about just kind of that debate that has also kind of cast a little bit of a cloud over light being shed upon this issue.
Yeah, great question. Yes, a lot of people, I think, have the same introduction to the phrase as they see somebody who's gotten in some kind of trouble for their sexual behavior, and then they go off to treatment, and now they're going to identify as a sex addict. It can seem like just an excuse for bad behavior, or a get out of responsibility free card for celebrities and so on. And I think the reason that so many people have come to have their first introduction via celebrities is that that's just who made the news, not realizing there was all sorts of other people who had the same issue. They just weren't noteworthy enough to make headlines. Absolutely, sex addiction is real. And one of the pushbacks initially were people who were saying, well, it's not like a drug that you put into your body. And I could counteract and say, well, okay, by that same logic, then a gambling addiction is not real, and there are no pathological gamblers, and of course there are, or some other behavior, just because it's not an actual chemical, is not real. But I think, especially over the last quarter of a century, Just look at the ubiquity of screen addiction. That so many folks, it's just the national epidemic. We're all. I got my phone right here. We're all, for the most part, screen addicts, and it affects our brain. And so, why should the specific focus on sex be any different? A lot of sex therapists initially looked at sex addiction and were afraid that it was just a way to keep people from expressing themselves sexually. That it was sexual. Sort of a conservative or a restrictive or a very narrow view of sexuality, and that sex addiction was just a way of saying this is behavior that I don't agree with, so I'm going to put a negative label on it. And sex therapists historically have had a goal of helping people to expand their sexual freedoms and their sexual identity and their sexual ability, be really champions of sexual freedom. So when this movement came along and said, well, some people can take it too far, that caused a lot of negative reaction at first in some circles to say, well, this is just some moralistic way of keeping a person from really exploring who they really are. But that is just not the case. Maybe it has been misapplied over the years in some circles, but any therapist at this point in time who says that sex addiction doesn't exist, they either haven't seen the kind of clients that I have, or they're just willfully not examining the evidence. I have seen too many people damage their lives and damage the lives of people who they care about through behavior that they know is not healthy for them or for their relationships, and yet they do it over and over and over again. So this is where I started to question myself. I go pretty deep into thinking, okay, well, how does this make sense? And I came to the point of realizing there's only two or three or four answers as to why somebody would keep engaging in the same behavior over and over that would hurt them and hurt others. One is that they just don't fully have control over themselves. And the only other primary consideration is that they're just a bad actor. They just do it because they can get away with it. They don't care. Maybe they're just narcissistic, sociopathic. They're doing it not because they have some addiction, but because they're just unethical people. And I do think there are a few people out there like that. But I think for the most part, people have just not been given the opportunity and the chance to learn how to channel their sexual behavior into appropriate ways. So many people with addictive or compulsive sexual behavior come out of some kind of childhood experience where they were the recipient of some sort of inappropriate sexual behavior themselves. There's just so much sexual trauma out there. And for so many people, the way of dealing with that sexual trauma is just what you'd call it, just repetition compulsion. They just go back to the same behavior. And even if it was not healthy, it's the behavior that they knew. It was the behavior that burned in. It was the behavior that became almost encoded into their neural pathways from a very, very early age. And that results in a person going back to the same poisoned well over and over again and trying to get healthy for it. And generally, it just gets worse and worse and worse until finally some crisis happens. Almost nobody comes to me just because they wake up one day and decide that I'm ready to stop engaging in this behavior. It almost always happens because some crisis has happened. And then the pain of staying the same outweighs is outweighed by the pain of just saying I have a problem and I need some help, and that's how people come to me.
Well, I love the insights that you offer there. First, in terms of helping us to address some of these misunderstandings, misconceptions, myths about sex addiction, but then also kind of helping us to take it a step further and just saying that for some people, it could be an issue regarding control. It could be an issue of them acting out. It doesn't make it right, but it could be an act of like acting out past traumas and just kind of an outcome of that. And so kind of talking about your framework that you've developed here in terms of problematic sexual behavior and kind of giving us a little bit more of an expansive like understanding or framework to work with. Could you share more about the development of that, as well as just explaining more for folks out there, like what does that mean in terms of your framework of problematic sexual behavior?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I noticed for years in my practice as a therapist that some people would come to me and they were having a lot of problems with their sexual behavior. And I really wasn't sure actually that it was a result of loss of control, or that it was something that just couldn't help, or that it was an addiction. But that was really the only offering that was out there to give that person help. So I took many clients who called themselves sex addicts, and I helped them get into maybe 12-step recovery programs for sex addiction, which I got a lot of benefit from. But at the same time, not everybody, I think, fully fits within the addiction narrative, and not everybody wants to fit in the addictive narrative. So I would wind up getting into this so many, I don't want to say power struggles, but then really we would have to almost go back and forth about, well, is this really an addiction or was this not an addiction? And what I realized was happening is that people were getting too caught up on the words and too caught up on the labels. And that labels have a tendency to keep people from really getting the help that they need if they don't like the labels. Labels can clarify, but labels can also uh, uh, just stop people from making any progress. So I wanted a way to get away. I wanted to find a way to get away from labels. Let's don't worry so much about what we call it and get too deep in the weeds of, is this an addiction or a compulsion or any word that you want to put to it, but really get right to the question of what is it that makes any kind of sexual behavior a problem for a person. And I specifically wanted to use the word problematic because if you think about it, to say that something's problematic just means it's a problem. It doesn't have to mean it's an illness. It doesn't mean it's a sickness. It doesn't mean it's a pathology. It just means there's a problem going on. So I wanted to engage people with the basic question about their sexual behavior. Is this a problem for you? And let's figure out together whether it is or not. So I wanted a really simple way of helping to engage somebody in what I would now call, just, I didn't use the language at the time, but I've come to call it just a basic sexual health conversation. And it's just to sit down with somebody and have a conversation that really is based on 5 questions. And I've realized that all problematic sexual behavior, if it's going to be a problem, it's going to be a problem in one of these following areas. One, it's behavior that violates commitments. So whatever else you can say about sexual behavior, if I'm engaging in behavior and I'm breaking my promises, I'm violating my commitments, whatever else I can say about it, that's a problem. The second category is behavior that's violating, I'll just speak first person, behavior that's violating my values. If I'm engaged in behavior and I can really look in the mirror and say, do I like what I'm doing? And say, no, I don't. I don't like this about myself. This goes against who I like to think I am. This goes against my view of myself as my best person. That's a values conflict. And so if my behavior is going against my values, that's a problem. No matter what else I want to say about it, it's a problem. Now, we could say the same thing about non-sexual behavior, but I'm going to focus on the sexual part right now. So the first question is that I ask folks is are you keeping your promises? The second question I ask is, are you okay with what you're doing? The third question I'm going to ask is, are you in control of yourself? And this is looking at the category of diminished control. And this is where addiction comes in, or compulsion comes in. This is where a person may say, I don't want to do this, but I keep finding myself drawn back to it. So I'll ask questions such as, do you feel like that at times your sexual urges are more powerful than you are? Have you ever told yourself you're not going to engage in a certain pattern of behavior and you find yourself going back to it even when you've told yourself you didn't want to it? Have you tried genuinely to stop and not been able to stop? And to the extent that a person says, yeah, I just can't seem to kick this. All right, I don't want to even use the word addiction at this point because that's a label. But as a description, that's a diminishment of self-control. That is, a person is not able to fully be in control of themselves. All right, so that's the third category. There's 2 more. The fourth one is simply, is everything going okay in your life? And this is a way of assessing negative consequences. If a person is engaging in sexual behavior and they keep bringing a lot of problems into their lives, well, problem is as problem does. Maybe this behavior doesn't go against their commitments. Maybe it doesn't go against their values. Maybe they're not even out of control with it, but it keeps bringing negative consequences into their lives. Okay, That's a problem. And I'll come back to some examples about that in a moment. Let me go to the fifth of 5 questions that I would ask a person to evaluate with themselves, which is, are you protecting other people? And this is, are you being responsible? And when I first used the word responsible when I was coming up with this problematic sexual behavior framework, and I was trying to consider what would be the best word to use, I challenged myself about using the word responsible sexual behavior, because for some people that sounds like it's a moralistic question. If you're not being responsible, you're being irresponsible, and that sounds very judgmental. And my goal is to get away with any judgment. But the more I did research and reflection and discussion with other people in the field of sexual health about what responsible sexual behavior means, I really came clear that it's not a moral issue, that there are, I think, 3 fundamental categories of what it means to be responsible sexually. And one is to have the full consent of everybody. If somebody who's involved in it doesn't have full consent, you can't call that responsible. The second is that everybody has to be protected from negative consequences. This means I can't be going around giving people sexually transmitted infections or causing unwanted pregnancies or so forth. Those are negative consequences. If I'm doing that, I'm not being responsible to others. And the third is I can't exploit anybody. If I'm exploiting anybody in my behavior, just by its very nature, that is not responsible. And so this means that I think this comes up a lot in pornography, that people can think pornography can be victimless, but if you really look deep enough, and you have to ask, well, are the people who are acting in these pornographic videos, are they truly doing this from a place of empowerment? Are they doing it because they really don't have much of a choice, or they are being exploited, or they in some ways are being trafficked, or they have some sort of impairment that's preventing them from making these choices on their own? If I'm participating in that, I'm participating in exploitation. So that's not responsible. So coming all the way back around to it, I came to the conclusion that through 5 simple questions, anybody could self-evaluate whether or not their behavior is healthy or problematic. And those questions are, am I keeping my promises? Am I okay with what I'm doing? Am I in control of myself? Is everything going okay? And am I protecting other people? And if you can clear all 5 of those hurdles, have fun. Go do whatever you want to do. If you're tripping one or more of those, then you need to get help. You need to have somebody that you can talk with. What I find very valuable about this problematic sexual behavior framework, Justin, is that if you notice, nowhere in there does it talk about the type or the frequency of behavior. I'm not asking, how many times are you masturbating a week? I'm not asking, are you involved in this type of behavior or that type of behavior? Do you engage in this and do you engage in that? And the importance of that is that if we start to assess a person's sexual behavior based upon the type or frequency of what a person is doing, we're going to get really lost in all the cultural variations about how people have sex. Some people are going to, 2 people can do the very same thing sexually, and for one person, it's fine. For another person, it's going to be very problematic based upon their cultural upbringing, how they live. So prior to this PSB framework, problematic sexual behavior framework, a lot of assessment instruments looked at the types of behavior that a person was getting into. A lot of times looking at maybe S&M behavior or some sort of a kink behavior or fetish behavior. And what I realized was happening with those kinds of approaches is that it was inherently pathologizing sexual behavior that maybe some people found objectionable, but for other people, it was well within their value system. And that was what I think was turning many people off to traditional sex addiction assessments. That so many of them actually they measure shame. They will ask people a lot of questions that have to do about whether they feel badly about their behavior. And I think it's important to look at whether a person is feeling badly about their behavior, but maybe they feel badly about it just because they're just saturated in shame, or they have nobody that they can talk with, or they don't have an understanding about their behavior. And so in that way, if we're going to pathologize a person simply because they feel shame, we're making the problem worse rather than better. So this problematic sexual behavior framework, I'd like to keep saying it over and over again, the PSB framework is a way that, since it eliminates labels, it eliminates shame. And since it eliminates pathology, we're not saying that you're sick or that you're ill. We're just saying you got a problem. Then we can look together at what needs to happen to keep that behavior from being a problem for you. I had a mentor decades ago. I always remember it. He said, remember, the person is not the problem. The problem is the problem. So with this PS framework, I wanted to really focus on, let's look at the behavior that's a problem, and let's try to avoid any sort of implication that somehow that person is the problem themselves. Person's not the problem. The person is the person who's, I would say, the person is a child of God. The person is a human being trying to find a way through to life. I don't want to make that person feel worse about themselves. I want to help them feel empowered to address their behavior in a way that causes them to live in a sexually healthy manner, and in that way, in a fully healthy manner. All right. I'll start preaching a little bit if I don't stop.
Yeah, no, preach on, Bill, because what's great about your framework here, and I love that it creates a little bit more clarity and some more detail, because I know that the term, and I'm glad you talked about like labels and descriptions. The label of sex addiction is like, okay, what do you do within that? But the PSB framework and the questions that it asks really could allow someone to kind of sit with. But I'm also glad that you talked about how we're not looking at the frequency of sexual behavior someone's engaging in, because that really, like, what is that really telling us? But it's like, is it coming up against commitments and values and control? And so it kind of brings me to something you brought up earlier, Bill, about how individuals find themselves at which it sounds like they've hit some sort of like rock bottom, or there's been some sort of like rupture of an experience. And so I would, I guess, love to hear more about, like, are there some common patterns that you observe from people of like when they find themselves at you? Is it because they found themselves in a situation where they've gone up against a commitment in a relationship or a marriage, or they've just lost control of themselves, and they really are at, like, they don't know where else to turn to? So I'm just curious about some of those common patterns that you've observed in folks who have found themselves working with you.
You bet. There's a phrase I heard years ago about true sex addiction that says, for the most part, people don't stop; they are stopped. Some sort of law. They hit some sort of a crisis point that gives them nowhere else to turn. And generally, that crisis point is going to be some type of discovery of behavior that they've been keeping secret. One of the problems with any sort of behavior that we keep secret is that we can engage in more and more of it, and it can get more and more intense and more deeper into a person's life. So many of my clients have developed deep and sometimes decades-long secrets from their primary relationships, generally their marriages or their long-term committed relationships, and then something happens where that becomes discovered. It's often a spouse it can be something as just finding a text, or just coming up with finding photos, finding some evidence that a person cannot lie their way out of, that shows that they've been engaging behavior that really violates their commitments, violates their values, is causing harm to other people. And the tragedy is that it is so often the people who suffer the most are the people who are the closest to that person's life. And I would say the people that person loves the most. Some partners would say, how could he love me if he hurt me in this way? Well, if he's truly behind the eight ball, if he truly has had a problem that hasn't been able to control, whether he loves a person, whether he knows it's right or wrong, whether he considers the long-term consequences, all those go out the window when a person is seized by that desire. It's the same thing if a person had a deep drug addiction, and a spouse rarely would say, well, if he loved me, he wouldn't be smoking crack, smoking meth. Well, no, that addiction will cause a person to operate no matter how they feel about the people around them. But when it comes to sexual behavior, it hurts so much worse for a partner to find out that the person that they have pledged their life to has not been sexually faithful to them, that it can truly feel like the wound that just cannot heal more than any other kind of betrayal. So generally people come to me because their life has exploded. And it would be one thing if they were the only ones who suffered from their behavior. The tragedy is that people who did not cause the problem at all are the ones that are going to suffer from it the most. And that's going to be the spouses, the other partners, and the children. And that's why anybody who does this work knows that a person who's engaged in this kind of behavior has really two challenges. One is to stop that behavior, don't engage in it anymore, and that often requires going back into your history, learning where it came from, learning skill sets to be able to have better ways of acting, all the ways to keep that behavior and getting a better support network work around, all those ways of stopping that behavior. But equally as important is healing the damage that's been caused, cleaning up the wreckage from the past. And that is it's not an easy process. It's not a simple process. It's not a process for the faint of heart. It takes a tremendous amount of work for a person to face the pain that they have caused another person and to do the long and arduous work of bringing healing into that relationship. And so that's where any therapist who's doing this work needs to really be very grounded in the dynamics of chronic betrayal trauma, because it's a form of PTSD unlike any other that's out there.
And Bill, with respect to that, because it's one of the things I appreciate about your work is you have a deep commitment to helping the partners of those who've been betrayed heal. I think we know, but could you share what are some of those psychological impacts, those consequences that you have seen from someone who has been unfortunately impacted by this type of betrayal, this type of infidelity trauma, just to really just honor the consequences of this?
So I think one way I want to answer that is imagine one of these sci-fi movies or horror movies where the main character finds out that all of the memories that they thought were theirs weren't theirs, and all of the history that they thought that they knew and relied upon, it turned out that was really not the case. That they were living in a reality that, unknown to them, was not really what reality was, and they had that ripped away from them, and they found out that what they thought they could rely upon, they could not rely upon. And what they thought was real was not real. And what they thought was true was false. That is just inherently crazy making. It is inherently traumatizing. If you came to me and you didn't know what was real and what wasn't real, I would look at that and I would say, well, we have a word for that. That word is psychotic. Somebody who's truly psychotic doesn't know the difference between reality and delusion. They're lost. This is like an imposed psychosis. This is like importing into a person's life crazy sauce and just covering over them so that once it finally becomes clear that person has been lied to in so many ways, no part of that person's life is untouched by that. The very underpinnings of reality have been shaken at the root, and that is so destabilizing that once you no longer know is up or is up down. Does 2 + 2 = 4 or 2 + 2 = 5? If you were living in a world in which that fundamental level of reality was up for debate, you would hardly know where to turn. And it can be the same thing with a person who finds out that the spouse that they've been married to for years and who seems like such an upstanding person, all of a sudden you realize that person has seen 1,000 prostitutes, and that person has spent $500,000 on sex workers, or that person has 5 terabytes of pornography on their hard drive, or that person has had a half a dozen affairs, or that person has had anonymous sex with untold numbers of people. To have that dropped upon you like a 10-ton weight is going to have a traumatic impact, almost worse than anything else. Almost worse than being damaged by a stranger, because you don't trust a stranger to begin with, but you trust your partner. It's worse than being in a car accident or something like that, because as terrible as that is, that's just a happenstance. It just happens. But to have that happen to someone that you've given your heart to and who claims to have given their heart to you is traumatic. As we used to say, 9 ways to Sunday. There's no level of a person's life that becomes unscathed by that, which is why the recovery from that type of trauma is so long and difficult to do.
Yeah. And before we talk about the recovery,
Yeah,
I just
go
want
ahead.
to comment.
Go ahead,
Oh,
please.
sorry, cut you off. What were you going to say there, Bill?
No, I was gonna tell a little anecdote, but I'd rather follow your lead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I guess I just want to just kind of uphold something you said here of like, it's for that person who's been betrayed. It's that loss of what they thought was the story, the person. There's a death there. There's a grieving process that I can only imagine that someone goes through. And like you said, they've put all their trust, their loyalty, their commitment, and only to find that whether this person has been living a double life or whatever the discovery is, there's just a deep pain to that, and it's I can only imagine how, and as someone who's done this, I can only imagine just kind of how deep that wound goes, and whether that what that healing process could what it entails.
It's a soul wound. It's a
Yeah.
soul wound.
So what I was gonna follow that up with was kind of pivoting to like your work with folks who are trying to recover from that, and on kind of both ends of it, starting with the person who's actually caused the betrayal. I was
Yes.
wondering for you, like, what is your starting point with them? Is it like you mentioned earlier? Is it going back to their history? Is it getting them to be more honest? Like, how do you start to help someone who understands that, hey, I don't want to continue operating in this way, whether it's living a double life, whether it's hurting my partner? How do you
Mhm.
get them on a point to starting with like healing themselves first?
Absolutely. I think the starting point is twofold. It has to be a commitment to live in honesty and to take responsibility for that behavior, and to develop the skills to truly be able to live in a healthy, intimate relationship, which so often requires tremendous gains in the ability to experience true empathy and true intimacy. When I say intimacy, I don't mean sexual intimacy. That's a subset. That will come along. I'm talking about intimacy. I often use the phrase "into me see," which is vulnerability and allowing self to be truly known. So many people that I work with, the people who engage in this type of behavior, they've never really let themselves be truly be known. And I have clients who, when they finally realize that they've made such a mess of their lives and they damaged their partners so deeply, they feel remorse. They feel all kinds of remorse. And I tell them remorse is not enough. I mean, of course, remorse is appropriate. Remorse is when you feel bad about yourself. I lean into empathy. And empathy is being able to feel the other person's feelings. And I have come to appreciate that when a person is steeped in remorse, then they're steeped in shame. And the more that you are living in shame, you can't live in empathy at that moment. So I try to help my clients move from shame to empathy, which is the ability to really take in the full damage of what they've caused to the person or people that they've cared about. It's really hard work to get there. And the commitment to honesty is truly that. Put it all on the table. If the relationship is going to heal, so often that relationship for that relationship to start with healing is that all secrets need to be on the table. All pieces of the jigsaw puzzle need to be face up. Um, because for a partner to know to try to rebuild their life, if they're going to heal, they need to know what they're healing from. They need to be able to know that whatever they're going to try to to build in that relationship from that point forward is going to be one of absolute honesty. So that's for my guys who have caused and I'm going to speak kind of gender based. I just in my own practice, I see men. I see men who have betrayed their spouses. Certainly, women do the same thing as well. And it's just how I've limited my practice. So sometimes you'll hear me speak in that gendered way. Um, the guys who have come in and who have engaged in such deception over their lives, they need to start by being honest with themselves, and that's looking in the mirror and saying, "Who am I and what have I done?" And so the good news about that, if there is that the level of devastation that they brought into their life is generally so intense that that it removes all self deception away from themselves. They're able to truly look with almost with horror about what they have done. Now, still, A lot of guys are going to sometimes hold back one secret or another, hold a little bit that they're going to take to their grave. This is one reason that in healing damaged relationships, what's called a formal disclosure is so often recommended. And a formal disclosure is when the person who's engaged in the deception writes down in black and white a history of all the behavior that they have kept secret. Anything that their partner had the right to know but that was kept from them is written down in a sequential way, from including every secret that that person came into the relationship with to every betrayal that's happened since then. And in a very organized way, you sit down, we'll have a formal disclosure session, which is where that person reads that one sentence at a time to their partner and gives them the absolute truth of what that behavior is like. That is one of the most courageous, hardest pieces of work that any man can ever do and any couple can ever heal. It is like passing through a keyhole to get to the other side of it. And some men will 99%, but they'll hold oftentimes one thing back. And this is the reason why some couples, when they have a formal disclosure, the spouse will insist upon a polygraph examination. Now, I don't advocate for polygraph, and I don't keep people away from doing that. A lot of my clients do have polygraphs after they've given a formal disclosure, because this guarantees they fully have gotten everything out, and there's no secrets inside of them. There's an old saying that says you're only as sick as your secrets. The reason that polygraphs are used is because the power of shame will keep people from bringing everything out. And if a person gives a disclosure but they hold one thing back, and if that thing they've held back becomes discovered later on, it's 100 times worse. It's just it's cruel to say that you said the truth, held one thing back, and have that be discovered later on. Now, polygraphs are not 100%. I tell people that. That's why they're not used in court. For betrayal recovery, done with a properly trained professional, the reliability is up in the high 90 percentile. So, but even 90 percentile means that 1 in 10 may have a false negative or a false positive. So I always tell partners, this is not an absolute guarantee, but it certainly does help to ensure that as much as possible that person is telling the truth. So that gives the greatest gift that a person can give to their partner, which is honesty. Now, and that's just the first part. For the spouse, they need a lot of support. They need a lot of empowerment. They need a lot of time. And they need to have the person who's betrayed them to realize that this time frame is not measured in weeks or months, but I'm measured in seasons. And which means that however long a person thinks this may take, it's going to take longer. And however hard the work the person thinks it's going to take, it's probably going to be harder at times. But the results on the other end are worth all of the effort, which is finally becoming a person of integrity, being a person whose words and behaviors line up, a person who has truly developed the ability to be absolutely empathetic, absolutely intimate, absolutely accountable, absolutely responsible. It oftentimes results in a man being a true man, the kind of man that he would not have been able to ever be had this not happened to them. And I'll end with this. This is one of those numerous examples where the kind of betrayal trauma that we're talking about can be the worst time in a person's life, and it can also be the beginning of a time of life that they never would have reached had they not gone through it, which is doing that final work of truly growing up and being a man. I have so many clients who come to me. I can see what their potential is, but at that time, I oftentimes see them as a boy's version of what a man was supposed to be like. They're successful. They've got a good job. They've got all the markings of a healthy life. But internally, inwardly, there's so much missing. They just never really learned how to truly show up in this world as a true man. And it's one reason that I work with a client to develop those skills that many times they just never had the opportunity to experience growing up in their family because they didn't have it to begin with. So this is generational work. The great news about this is that when a man is willing to do this work, he is helping not just himself, but he's helping every generation that comes after him. And this is what I think one person at a time helps to make the world better, because it is helping people no longer hide from their shadows, but face their shadows and learn the skills that keep this from just passing like a slinky from one generation to the next, and create whole new paradigms for how to be real, and walk on this earth. And so,
Yeah, no, this is really powerful stuff that you're sharing, Bill. And I just wanted to come back and amplify a couple things you said here.
sure.
First is for the the partner who's done the betrayal, the culprit here, understanding that difference between an apology and I'm sorry versus like really deep empathy and putting yourself in that person's shoes. I really just I want to highlight that because I know that's like there's such a difference that you talk about between those two.
Huge difference. Apologies are easy. Empathy is really difficult. Empathy means I really have to know how you feel. To truly know how you feel, I have to really listen to you, and I really have to face the impact of what I have done to you. And that means I have to really value your feelings more than my own at that moment.
And that's one of I think, the turning points is because for so many folks like myself who've been just perpetrators of problematic sexual behavior, you self-center your own needs, your own ego, your own narcissistic insecurities versus another person's. And so with you saying of like that empathy part of putting yourself in their shoes, feeling that hurt, that pain, that loneliness, that damage to the best of your ability is so who wants to feel that? Because then guilt and shame comes, but that is important to getting through and really seeing through, working through and healing the behavior that's been the problem.
Very well said.
And your part about the honesty also hits because I think for many folks out there to get rigorously honest at a core level of, and that can mean so many different things, whether it's being honest about your past, being honest about the intimacy, being honest about your own self-love, self-worth, or lack thereof, in looking through to getting it through external validations. That could be hard for anyone. I mean, especially a man to sit with, because we're supposed to give off this facade of being confident and all of these other toxic masculinity qualities. But I know in my own self of like having to sit with like, wait, I don't love myself. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm engaging in this behavior, because I'm looking to get some source outside of me versus looking inward. That's tough to get honest about, or the honesty of letting go of some of these things where you're like, you can't keep any weeds. You can't keep any secrets.
No.
Like you, in order to heal it, you got to reveal it.
Well said.
There's a lot of resistance, I'm sure, with some clients and getting to that point.
Tremendous. I sometimes will tell a person, if I only had 10 minutes to talk with you and I had to boil everything down to one piece of advice. In fact, if I only had 2 words to give you and then send you on our way, it would be, don't lie. Don't lie about anything. And if you can hold yourself to that standard, if you can just, I mean, sometimes you have to be really careful about how you do talk. But if you can take that true integrity, that's integrity. If you can live in a way that does not have deception in it, your life will change.
So Bill, you kind of talked a lot about the person who's like done the harm and their work in healing. But I want to go back to the person who's been unfortunately the impacted one by the betrayal, because for some folks it's that fork in the road. Do I stay? Do I go? How do you support someone through that decision, or like what's important for you to help folks out there that might be listening to understand as they recover from infidelity when they're trying to ask themselves that question? Do I stay in this relationship that I've been in, that I've invested in? Do I go? What would you offer to someone kind of going through that journey in their mind?
I love the question. My first reaction is I want to give that person as many different choices and empower that person to have as many different choices as possible. Because one of the greatest pain about all of this is that person's sense of choice was taken away from them. They didn't choose to have this happen. So I want to help that person build in as many choices as possible. And oftentimes those can be very basic choices of empowerment that can include do you need a separation or not? Do you want your partner to be in the same room with you or not? What kind of information do you want from that person? Just really how to have as many empowered choices as possible, especially in those early months. I think it's so important to work with people who are either as professionals who specialize in this work or as peers, people who have gone through this. I have found that so often, when a person has been chronically betrayed like this, that they will go to well-meaning family and friends who they think they're giving the best advice, but they may say things like, "Well, if this happened to me, I would just leave him," or they will come to some sort of really clear answer. And what I've come to appreciate is nobody knows what they would do unless they'd be in the middle of it, unless they've had it happen themselves. So it's really helpful to be in peer groups that have other betrayed partners in it. There are a lot of specialist therapists have betrayed partner support groups or therapy groups, bringing people in who have had those very similar journeys. There are peer groups. There are organizations, groups that can bring together people who have been chronically betrayed together as people who can help each other in their mutual understanding of just what this process is like. So give the person as much information as they can give the person as many choices as they can give the person as much patience as they need. I tend to encourage, if a person doesn't know whether to stay or go, I tell them they don't have to make that decision right now. If they want to make that decision right now, absolutely. They can make that decision to walk to the attorney's office that afternoon if they want to. I tend to suggest, if possible, that that person hold off and make those long-term decisions later. If possible, I would say if you can make it a year, if you can hang tight for a year, let's see if the person can do the work to actually heal. Let's take this one step at a time. I say over a gradual period of a few months, you'll know if things are getting better or not. And at the end of the year, there's not been the type of improvement that you know that you deserve. I think you're in a much better frame of mind to be able to make that decision that's not reactive, but it's very, very responsive. But I tell the person you have 364 opportunities to take the exit ramp. You make a commitment for that for a full year. But if any time you say, "No, I can't do this anymore," nobody can judge you for making the decision that you need to take your life in a different situation. So this boils down to lots of support, lots of understanding, and be surrounded by other people who truly know what this is like, rather than putting on a game face and acting like things are okay, and not having enough people who are there to help you in a pain that, again, it's just unlike any other.
And thank you just for highlighting that. Like it's no one's in their shoes, so it's really their decision to make. And I know it's like a lot of people have some well-meaning advice, but and clearly they don't want to see a friend, a family member in that type of pain. But it is important for whoever it might be to understand, like, they've got choices whether they decide to leave or whether they decide to go, and they're empowered to go through that process however they see fit. But getting support is really helpful in that. And one thing, speaking of support, before we get into our Each One Teach One and wrap up here, one of the programs I've heard you talk about is the 12-step program. I know you're familiar with, and it's something I'm a part of, SAA, Sex Addicts Anonymous. And so I would love to hear you share more about, like, how 12-step programs work, especially for someone who's probably dealing with problematic sexual behavior, and maybe what they could seek to benefit from being a part of a 12-step program.
Sure. I'm a huge fan of 12-step programs. I think to be able to be in a room, in a culture in which other people are committed to honesty, in which you could share whatever was going on in your life, and other people nod their head in understanding, to be able to have mutual support and accountability, to have a venue where people are, as I say, living in the solution rather than living in the problem, to take accountability, to develop those character traits that can really allow a person to improve their life. There's just nothing like it. I often think that probably everybody can benefit by going to some sort of 12-step program, just for the just for the benefit that they give. But 12-step programs are not the only way that they can get that. I will share that in my own professional work, I run a lot of therapy groups, and I call them PSV groups. I have therapy groups where men come in who have had problematic sexual behavior. Some of them identify as addicts, and some of them don't. And the beautiful part about that, it doesn't really matter whether the person says that they're an addict or whether they're not. They're still there to help each other to accomplish all of those benefits and gain that sexual health vision. But not too many people are out there doing PSB groups. It's still relatively a fresh way of looking at it. I'd love to see more therapists doing that, but right now I'm one of the few. I just did a workshop this past week to a bunch of group therapists, and they were excited about putting this into their practice. But for the partners, there are similar 12-step groups for people who are in a relationship with an addict. Just as in Alcoholics Anonymous, there is Al-Anon family groups, which is where the partner or a family member of an alcoholic would go to for their own support. In Sex Addicts Anonymous, as you probably know, there is S-Anon, which is a support group for partners of sex addicts. I feel that can be very helpful, but it's a little tricky. I think the benefit of S&On and those groups is that, it brings together people who have all experienced very similar traumas, and they can support each other. Nobody's going to gasp when they hear what somebody said. Everybody's there. It's like a lifeboat to bring that person in. My only caution when I recommend that somebody go to S&On is that S&On is a 12-step program, and 12-step programs include people looking at their own character defects, making their own amends, doing their own work of personal growth, which is wonderful. But it's really important for me that a partner not get overly involved in how to make their own amends and somehow feel like that they need to be taking responsibility for their life too soon, because I can almost turn into blaming the victim. So I think S&I is very, very valuable as a mutual support network. And that I tell the partner the classic saying, I'm sure you've heard it: take what you need and leave the rest. For some partners, it's a haven unlike any other. And for other people, they start off well with it, and then maybe they find it's more beneficial to find a professionally led partner support group that's run by a betrayal trauma therapist to have that really nuanced care and understanding.
No, I'm glad that you talked about all of those different opportunities and areas for support for both the person who's going through and trying to heal this, but then also the partner who's been betrayed and the support that they could get for themselves in this process. So with that said, Bill, we're going to, as we get ready to close out here, I got our each one teach one rapid fire questions for you. So the first question that I wanted to ask is, what's one book or podcast that you would recommend that's been a game changer for you in your own growth journey?
Okay. What a great question. Well, my first answer is going to maybe, I don't know if it's unusual or not. The one book I would suggest, my Desert Island book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's a book I had on my shelf for years before I actually got around to reading it. Small, short little book that really opened up a lot in my life about that meaning is what this journey is all about. And when that meaning is shaken, our ability to live our life is shaken. So Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, I think, is a book that everybody ought to read.
Beautiful book, Bill. So thank you for that recommendation there. When it comes to habits and practice, what's one habit or practice that has been very impactful for you in your lifestyle design?
Okay, as I said earlier, stay honest, don't lie, stay connected, don't be isolated, and engage in regular self-care, and don't be afraid to say no rather than overextending yourself to other people.
Love that list right there, Bill. Those are some great reminders. So in terms of a law or a policy, what's a law or policy that you would make that everyone in the world would need to abide by?
Oh, boy, that's a tough one. What, a law or a policy? I don't think I'm going to put it as a law, but certainly if it was a policy, it's just, that can't do any better than that core spiritual admonition that's given in so many different faith traditions. Treat other people as you'd like to be treated yourself. Treat other people with respect, and look out for each other.
Golden rule never goes out of style. So that's right. So the last question this season is all about personal transformation through letting go of what no longer serves us. So Bill, what's one limiting belief about yourself that was important for you to shed in order to become who you are today?
Oh, the limiting belief was I'm not worth it. This idea that somehow this is for somebody else, not for me. I think for everybody, we are all worth the investment of effort in ourselves and the investment of care by other people to be able to live our best lives, and that the work is hard, but that the benefit is always worthwhile, and that you, I, all of us are worthwhile people, are worthy people.
Hmm. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Bill, for that. So the last question for you is, what's next for you, Bill, and where can people go to learn more, find out more about you and the great work that you're doing with the framework?
Hey, great, thank you. For me, I'm writing a workbook on these 5 questions, the 5 sexual health questions, so that people can really walk through it themselves and ask themselves these questions. So I'm challenging myself to do a little bit about that every day. So that's what's next for me. And how people can reach me is pretty easy. My name's Bill Herring, and billherring.com is a way to reach my website. And you do a search with my name online. You see me on YouTube with a number of different podcasts that I've been a part of. I'm glad to add this one to it. And email address is very easy, bill@billherring.com. So that's BILLHERRING. And I'm easily findable.
Awesome stuff. Well, Bill, I appreciate you again for your time, for your work in this space, for the PSB framework. And it's just been incredible to have this conversation with you. It's been incredibly healing coming across your work and your articles. And I just know that all of your clients, as well as the listeners, are going to get so much from today's conversation. So just thank you.
It's been a real honor. Thank you.
So folks, that is it for today's show. I'd like to thank you all for your presence and tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to show your support by sharing the Living Once Twice podcast on Instagram, LinkedIn, leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and also visiting us on YouTube. Reaching out to you all through the time and the space that separates us to say, remember, your dream life is waiting for you. It's time to go for it. You deserve it. Catch you later on Living Once Twice.